So should I? Should I ask guest? Okay. Honorable Pandit sir. Hello, Honorable Pandit sir. Should we start?
Yes, madam.
Hello, sir.
Yes, madam.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. A very warm and hearty welcome to all of you. Today, I, Dr. Jyoti Dhokle, take this immense opportunity on behalf of Sri Balaji Sansthan's Devgaon Rajas, Sri Venkatesh Arts, Commerce and Science College Devgaon Raja, to welcome all delegates and participants for this one-day national webinar on the topic Translation in Practice, Challenges and Possibilities, which is organized by Department of English in collaboration with IQAC. Friends, translation enables effective, efficient, and empathetic communication between people, language, and culture around the world. It breaks down state or country barriers and borders. It paves the way forward for global interaction and for the development of a global economy. Because of translation, we can revisit the past, live in the present, and dream about the future. Today, there is a need for translation in diverse fields, especially in literature. Even though it is so essential, important, then also very highly skilled translators face many challenges such as grammar, culture, rules of language, habits of people, idioms, or expression. And so we took it necessary to let the academicians know what are the possibilities and opportunities in translation studies, particularly while translating literary text. During this COVID-19 pandemic period, we all are in a lockdown situation. So why not to take this opportunity to translate any literary text with the help of the expertise invited in this webinar. I'm sure this webinar would surely be helpful to the researchers and interested translators in the field of language and literature. To proceed further, first of all, on behalf of organizing committee, I would like to thank our Honorable Principal, Dr. G.V. Zadav, sir, for giving us permission to organize this webinar. Thank you very much, sir. Friends, to welcome our guest is our Indian culture. So today we have a very renowned person with us as a keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Milind Pandit, sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Matsyodari, Ambad, Maharashtra. I extend my warm welcome to you, sir, and I also request you to inaugurate today's webinar also, sir. Thank you, sir. I also extend my warm welcome to Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble, sir, Associate Professor, English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, who is with us as a resource person of preliminary session 1. It's my proud privilege to welcome our second guest, Honorable Dr. Narayan Prachand, sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh. Welcome, sir. For the second session, he's our resource person. Welcome and thank you all three of you for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thank you, sir. I'm very delighted to tell you all that we have got overwhelming response from all over the country. So once again, I welcome all the participants and delegates for gracing the event with your presence. I'm sure that this webinar will be gainful, thought-provoking, and very useful to all of us. Now, I would like to request Dr. Eknath Bhalerao, sir, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Sri Venkatesh College, Devgaon Raja, to introduce today's guest of honors. Please, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. At the outset, on behalf of Sri Balaji Sansthan, Sri Venkatesh Arts, Commerce and Science College, Devgaon Raja, District Buldhana, I welcome our delegates dignitaries, delegates, and academicians from different parts of the country in one-day national level webinar on translation in practice, challenges and possibilities. Now I am going to introduce guests of honor who are present over here by online mode because of the outbreak of COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic situation throughout the country. On this auspicious occasion, we have Honorable Dr. Milind Pandit sir is being with us as a keynote speaker. Dr. Pandit sir is Associate Professor, Department of English, Masudari Mahavidyalaya, Ambad, Maharashtra. Dr. Pandit sir is renowned scholar in linguistic theory, literature, and social studies. Dr. Pandit sir pursued his PhD from Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, Maharashtra, entitled The Works of Mahashweta Devi, Postcolonial and Subaltern Aspects. Now he is recognized supervisor of PhD of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad. He also credited 2 books and 10 research papers in national, international reputed journals. He actively participated in 15 international, 22 national, and 6 state-level conferences during his academic career. Dr. Pandit sir is nominated as a member of Board of Studies in English of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad for his outstanding contribution in academics. Dr. Pandit sir is recipient of Pratibha Jyotiba Phule State Level Ideal Teacher Award 2016. In addition to this, he has personal collections of books around 100 titles, 1,000 titles. It is our privilege to have him over here as a keynote speaker of today's webinar. On behalf of the college, I welcome you, sir. For technical session first, we have another renowned scholar in English language and literature, Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble sir, from Department of English, the Department of Indian and World Literature at English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad. He offered PG courses on childhood studies, comic narratives, Indian women playwrights, American literature, and African American literature. He has his PhD on Indian women playwright in translation. He has co-edited an anthology, Approaches to Childhood, Issues and Concerns in Creative Representation in November 2015. I wholeheartedly welcome you, sir, on behalf of the for technical session second. We have Honorable Dr. Prachanda Narayan, Department of English, Rajiv Gandhi Center. Dr. Prachanda Narayan, from Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University, Aurangabad, and he is Central University, Pondicherry. The study area which is close to his heart is Indian writing in English in general and Dalit and Subaltern literature in particular. He chose Dalit literature for his research in both MPhil and PhD because he thought this is a way to explore the regional literature and to bring it to the national and international forum and platform. He presented papers and chaired sessions in many national and international conferences and published research papers in national and international journals. I welcome you, sir, on the behalf of the college in this webinar. I welcome all the delegates, dignitaries, and academicians across the country in the webinar throughout the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again for introducing our today's guest. Now, I would like to respected Honorable Dr. S.D. Chauhan, sir, coordinator of today's webinar, IQAC coordinator and head of Department of English, Sri Venkatesh College, Devgaraja, to propose his introductory remarks. Respected sir.
Very good afternoon to you. The proposed inaugurator of the webinar, Honorable Principal Dr. G.P. Jadhav, sir. He is not able to deliver his inaugural address due to his indisposition. The keynote speaker of this webinar and a voracious reader of language and literature and a renowned personality in the field of literature, Professor Dr. Milind Pandit Sir, Machchadari Mahavidyalaya, Ambad. The resource person of the plenary session, the dynamic personality, Dr. Rahul Kamble Sir, English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad. The another resource person of the plenary session and the young and passionate reader of English language and literature, Dr. Narayan Pachand, Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh. The anchor and the department colleague, Dr. Jyoti Dhokle ma'am, also my department colleague, Dr. A.B. Bhalerao sir, so Mundisha Mude ma'am, and all my dear participants. I welcome you all in the national level webinar on translation in practice, challenges and possibilities, organized by the IQAC and the Department of English in Sri Venkatesh Arts, Commerce, Science College. To put in a nutshell, the intention behind organizing this webinar, I would like to say that there has been remarkable evolvements in the field of language and literature. It has different dimensions. And along with the regular practice of writing and studying English literature or any literature, there is also one popular practice of translating the literature in local languages into English languages and vice versa. We know that there are so many great books as far as Maharashtrians are concerned. We all know that there are some great books that are translated into English and also in our local language. To give examples, we can say that G.P. Shaw's Pygmalion has been translated as The Fulrani. Even the Sahitya Akademi winning award, Sadananda Deshmukh's Baromas is also translated into English. And Dr. Kiran Nagarkar's 7 sixes are 43 is also translated in English from Saat Sakham Precharis. So there are so many works which are translated into local languages and vice versa. So from this standpoint, I would like to say that the skills of translations are becoming even more important and desirable as today's multicultural and multilingual society demands effective, efficient, and emphatic communication between languages and cultures. We can also say that reading literature from a culture different from one's own helps people to develop a wider understanding of the world around him. Hence, taking into consideration the need of the time with respect to language and literature, today's webinar is organized on the issue of the translation studies by the Department of English in our college. I'm sure that the trio we have amongst us are quite well versed in terms of the said theme and the title of the webinar, and they will edify us with respect to the possibilities and challenges in the field of translation, in the practice of translation. I again welcome them and also thank them for accepting our invitation and making this webinar a successful one. I thank you, sir, and I also thank all the participants for joining this webinar. With this introductory remark, I stop here. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for such an elaborative introductory remark. Thank you very much. Now, we are going to start today's session, but before that, I would like to request our participants to put their questions in the chat box while the session is going on, and only few questions will be selected due to time constraint. Now, I would like to request a very renowned, stalwart person, our today's guest, Honorable Dr. Milind Pandit Sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Machchadari, Ambad, Maharashtra, to deliver his keynote address with respect to this webinar. Please, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, madam. It is great delight to be here associated with all. Actually, this is again a special privilege and also equal pleasure for me to be a speaker of this session. In fact, Sri Venkatesh College, Deolgaon Raja is just like the second college for me, because I have very good relationship, very good friends on that campus. For example, Dr. Gajanan Zadav, the Honorable Principal, happens to be a close friend and well-wisher of ours. And whenever we meet, we keep on sharing certain ideas related to education and the field of literature. I also have Dr. Eknath Bhalerao, who is a friend from Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Marathwada University campus. And we have Dr. Rahul Kamble, Dr. Prachanda Narayan as the speakers next to my session. And these are very serious scholars if I understand them properly. And if it is not, it doesn't sound an exaggeration, because I have personally witnessed both of the speakers having been dedicated to their work. Then we also have Dr. Jyoti Dhokle, who has been comparing this function, and Ms. Manjusha Mule. And friends, let me come to the person who has been so very special as a friend to me, and he is none other than Dr. Sudhir Chavan, who is a thorough gentleman. And the features of this man have been that he has been so humble, down to earth, a thorough gentleman, hardworking, dedicated, and always curious. And whatever he does, he is quite meticulous at doing the things as far as he is concerned as an academic. So he is a lovable friend. Let me iterate here. And yes, my special gratitude or my sincerest thanks go to Dr. Gajanan Jadhav, Dr. Sudhir Chavan for this privilege, and of course their team. And the people working at the Department of English I have seen have been so active and dynamic. And I have no doubt in stating that in times to come, this department would have some very special outputs that would be commendable. And that is how I would like to say, because all these people have been dedicated, and in the lead of Dr. Sudhir Chavan, I'm sure that there are going to happen so many things of great productivity. So with these words, again, I would like to say I am very much obliged to you all for this opportunity. And as the topic of this webinar, which is the national level webinar, is translation in practice, challenges and possibilities, I would like to take this opportunity to place on record my heartiest congratulations to Dr. Sudhir Chavan and his colleagues on having gone for such a theme, because this is a very important area if we think in terms of, say, connecting cultures, developing areas of knowledge, and yes, establishing links with the various types of, academies, the overall academia, let me say. And translation always functions as the bridge between the cultures, between the academies and nations and cultures, of course. So having gone for such a topic, the Department of English of Sri Venkatesh College, Deolgaon Raja has, of course, undertaken a very special activity which deserves a lot of appreciation to me, actually. Because on translation, there are very few activities or say academic events organized. And I haven't seen during these days, because I have been a speaker to a few conferences and webinars, I would like to say, online. And I didn't come across the areas that are especially associated with language. And it has been seen that language is such an area which has so far remained in that neglect. I do not know what are the reasons, but at some point in time in the past, we found that language was emphasized by almost everyone. And today we find that language is an area that has been left into, say, an unpardonable, corner, we can say. And then this is how actually we can look at it. And language happens to be the key to our passport to each and every area of knowledge. I mean, this is what I personally believe. Well, again, I would like to say that translation is something that brings about greater levels of connectivity in the various fields. And as the principal is not here, I am also asked to, declare inauguration of this webinar. So before moving any further, I would like to say this webinar is opened. This webinar is inaugurated. Yes. I shall just begin with what Charles Larson has stated in his essay called Heroic Ethnocentrism, the idea of universality in literature. Charles Larson is a post-colonial theorist who took to teaching in a nation, in an African nation like Nigeria. And while teaching the students there, he had come across certain questions in his classroom. See, for example, the first question that he faced was, what is a flush toilet? And he said that such normal questions, in fact, surprised him. And he was not in a position to describe the thing like flush toilet, etc., simply because he has entered the classroom in which the learners were not aware of that kind of thing. And that is why he says it was very difficult for me to deal with the questions of this sort. Another question that baffled him more was by a student, and it was like, excuse me, sir, what does it mean to kiss? And then he said that this question was so much difficult than the questions that were related to the plot or characters of the novel he was teaching in that classroom. Friends, this happens when we enter the area of the strangers, or maybe the unfamiliar area, to put it in a better way. When we enter the unfamiliar areas, whether of culture, of education, or anything else, we find that we keep on getting confused and we are not able to properly deal with those areas. So with this, I would like to say that I have my presentation to make. I hope it would make some sense and justify my role as the keynote speaker of this session. Actually, such kind of responsibility handed to me by Dr. Sudhir Chauhan and Dr. Zadav seems to be, greater than what I deserve or than what I can handle. But still, I would like to do my best to justify this invitation as the keynote speaker of this session at this webinar. I would like to share my screen. I hope I have access to that. May I please request?
Yes, sir. Yes, you can share.
Okay. So thank you very much, sir. Yes, translation in practice, challenges and possibilities. I know that I have the bad habit of continuing for a long time, but I would do my best to finish my talk within the stipulated time. Yes, I would like to first of all begin with the basics of translation. I have collected, say, definitions, uh, three of them from the Oxford Dictionary, which is the 10th edition. It is the process of changing something that is written or spoken into another language. This is very important. We have a journey from one language into the other. I have always discussed these issues with my students. I told them that translation is something which sometimes comes to us as a third-hand thing. I mean, not exactly the second-hand thing, etc. For example, when we have a subject like psychology, or say some other subject that is born in a Western context which does not communicate in English. For example, when the theories like that of psychology get generated into a specific language like maybe Swiss, German, etc., then that journey is from German into English and from English into Marathi. Just imagine what kind of essence we might be having. I mean, whenever the issue of translation comes to the fore, we find the issue of essence is necessarily debated and yes, argued. And of course, the people doubt the credibility of the essence they ultimately find on their hand. So this is a journey from one language to the other, and that from that language to another one. And this is a very challenging task. And we also have the translators. I mean, I shall come to that later on. But the translators sometimes have been professional, and sometimes we find that translation has been converted into a kind of mere convenience. And that definitely harms the actual meaning of the text that is being translated. So the second definition that we have here is a text or word that's been changed from one language into another. So this is actually what we can rest on for a while. And the last one is the process of changing something into a different form. See, etymologically, we find that the basic word is translatus, derived from Latin. Trans means across, beyond, and latus means born or carried. And translatus, which functions as the past participle of transfer. Here I have deliberately taken up certain key terms associated with the translation process. Meaning, interpretation, these are the usual words that we find. Then source language and target language are, the key terms in any kind of translation. We also have the case of calque, loan word, then equivalence or equivalents. Then we have essence, I have just spoken of, syntax, semantics, then grammar. I mean, semantics is very important in the translation activity. Syntax can be controlled in, say, one's given language, but when it comes to semantics, that happens to be a delicate area when it comes to translation. We have grammar, we have phone, the phones of language, we have morphemes. And yes, there are two terms I have deliberately put in red. One is AMT and the other CAT. Automatic machine translation and computer assisted translation. I mean, one is machine translation, the other machine assisted translation. These are the two areas that we need focus on for a while. Very often we should be aware of these. Automatic translation cannot be reliable. It has been very often found. And it is said that automatic translation not only involves, say, energy and money, but then there are also other factors that it involves, and it becomes a lengthy process. Because a machine cannot give us the translation that we exactly aim at. For example, in computer, if we expect some sense of meaning, I mean, some sense of interpretation out of a specific word or sentence, there's no guarantee that that machine would be giving us that. So this is where we find that the role of machine cannot be reliable completely that way. It can help us. I mean, we have Google Translator, etc. But can we really have the exact translation that we expect? Then the answer would be mostly no. For example, when we put in a statement like, say, he has gone, for example, he has gone or he has passed away. Or in Marathi, we have a statement like to gela kiwa te gelet. Then the translation out of this machine would be he went or he has gone at the most. I mean, if we think in terms of change of tense, etc. But here in Marathi, jane means to pass away. I mean, that is another interpretation out of it. But this machine cannot understand, because a machine always runs in accordance with the commands that have been put inside it or put on it. And that is why we cannot have the exact meaning out of that. For example, when there's a Hindi sentence like ab ve nahi rahe, the same thing. There could be a translation of this kind: he has not remained, rather than he has passed away, etc. So machine translation cannot be as reliable as we find the practical translation undertaken or done by someone. And another thing is computer assisted translation can of course be reliable for that matter. And computer assisted translation can give us easy access to save our time, our energy, and sometimes we can come across certain, say, terms that remain beyond, say, our knowledge, etc. See, there are certain features. I wouldn't like to read all of them, but then one thing I would like to read here is, or two statements I would like to read are: translation is an activity upon which commercial, political, and cultural livelihoods depend. I shall just tell you that there are, I mean, this is true in the case of minor languages. For example, there is a language called Hebrew from Israel. Hebrew was once, even today, it is considered as the oldest language, or maybe one of the oldest languages of the world. Arguably the oldest language, let us call it. And this Hebrew is not alive elsewhere. And we understand that a nation like Israel does not have an option but to depend upon translation for their commercial, political, and cultural livelihoods. And in that regard, we can say that translation functions as one of the pivotal factors. And the last statement I would like to again express is the translator cannot be replaced. This is again a very important statement, an important feature we can say, or you can also call it a hypothesis. Because a translator, as we have recently seen, machine cannot replace the man. And that is why, instead of man, I would like to use the word human. That is more appropriate. So a machine cannot replace a human, and that is a fact. And if we go by this kind of thinking, then we can understand that however great developments there be on the grounds of technology, we cannot have replacement of humans that way, and translation is one such area. Then here, there are certain theories of translation. I have chosen just three. One is generative, the other functionalist, and the third one is polysystem. Polysystem I have taken in the final part of my discussion, whereas generative and functionalist, I just, excluded from my discussion for the time being, because given the time constraint, it's not possible for me to deal with each and every idea that is related to the area of translation. while generative approach to translation is simply based upon Noam Chomsky's TG, that is transformational generative grammar. We have functional grammar of Michael Halliday and others. And types are, for example, three. One is phonemic translation, the other word for word translation, and third is free translation. I was speaking about a kind of patchy translation, or the translation that has been undertaken based upon one's own, what we can say, implementation of one's ideas. See, free translation, I would like to slightly elaborate on this. Free translation is an area which usually carries a lot many faults. Read most of the Marathi texts and you would find that translation has always functioned there as a matter of convenience. I mean, because the translator was not in a position to, derive everything in its exactitude, in the exact duplicacy, etc. The translator simply goes on adding, certain words of his or her own mind. I shall come to this again later on when I move on to the other titles and slides. See, translation studies. I mean, there's a person called James Holmes who did not believe in any kind of theory. He said that theory cannot help all the time. And that is why he coined a term called, translation studies. See, we have a great difference between theory and practice. And sometimes theory does not work in practice. And this is the difference, which actually keeps us at bay. And it happens. Not all the time can we go by theories. I mean, we have, for example, the theory of how to swim. We know the perfect, idea of swimming. But unless we put that idea of swimming into practice, it's not possible for us to swim. However, great knowledge we possess about the idea of swimming or the act of swimming, unless we practically swim on the water, we are not going to understand what swimming is in practice. And that is why sometimes the theory has to be put away and practice to be concentrated upon. And that is why we have the attitude of James Holmes about the theories of translation. See, sometimes we find that the people that are trained in the area of translation may not have, that kind of translation which even say the people who believe that they can bring about the exact rendering of a text. Naturally, they can do better. And that is the difference between theory and practice. So not all the time can theory be useful. This is what I mean. I mean, not all the time. Yes. So here in this activity of translation, we have the translator, interpreter, professional translator, then trained professional, amateur, and paranative speaker and biculturist. So these are the people generally involved in the activity of translation. While speaking about, say, trained professionals and say, maybe amateur or say a person who is, who has turned a translator out of his or her own accord, can do better. See, I have put on the next slide an example which I would like to explain here itself. We have two textbooks. One is Choti Munda and His Arrow by Mahashweta Devi, which is originally written in Bengali, and the other is Jutan, which is originally written in Hindi. See, Choti Munda and His Arrow is a text which is translated by G.C. Spivak, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, which is one of, say, the most renowned names around the world in post-colonial theory and studies. And on the other hand, we have Arun Prabha Mukherjee from Toronto, who has translated Jutan from Hindi into English. when you read both the textbooks, you find that the translation made by, say, Arun Prabha Mukherjee has been, so lucid and so clear that we keep on, generating enthusiasm, and we are so curious to learn the things that are linguistic. But when it comes to Choti Munda and his arrow, we find that Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak has, actually, she has admitted that she always attempts to give a scholarly translation. That is how she says in her, say, preface. She says, my attempt is always to give a scholarly translation to the people. See, again, the terms differ. Scholarly translation can be a useful thing in an academic atmosphere. But what about those people that are outside this radius? And then we can understand that scholarly translation may not be, as noteworthy as the one we find that is meant for the general audience or the general readers. So this is what sometimes happens at the hands of the trained professionals. And yes, when you start reading Juten is a text that interests us so much more than Choti Munda and his arrow. This is my experience. It can be taken as subjective, but this is what I felt out of it. And what is the function of translation? For example, bridging the gap between two foreign languages. Then second function is transfer of message from one language to another. And the third one is bringing together literary studies, anthropology, psychology, linguistics, etc. And then the medium or the media are three. One is written, the other spoken, and the third is signed. Written language is always the business of a translator, whereas spoken or signed language, that of an interpreter. Simply, we cannot do with the people that are translators. We also need interpreters most of the times. And we also have three kinds of register: formal, informal, and sometimes slang. How does slang become part of a textbook that is translated? For example, let us have Juten itself. In Juten, we have the people, the characters making use of slang. And if you go to the textbooks from Dalit literature or say Black literature, you would find that there are a number of words that could be treated as slang. So again, it becomes a challenge to accommodate that slang into that translation. We also have a text like Untouchable by Mulk Raj Anand. In that, there's a common term. And this happens when you have the people that are unfamiliar to some kind of life, some kind of area. It is not possible for them to justify that, work produced on that atmosphere. See, in, say, Untouchable, there's a word that constantly goes between, Lakha and his friends, and it is brother-in-law. Brother-in-law is a term which has been actually mockingly used, or which has been used as a slang term. But Mulk Raj Anand could not translate it in a slang fashion. For example, brother-in-law is a respectable term which can also be part of euphemism, which can also be part of a formal rendering. But brother-in-law, in terms of a text that is related to the lives of untouchables, cannot be an appropriate term. So this happens sometimes. Actually, a lot could be spoken on this text. And as I very often said, I'm not satisfied with this text, but then that deserves a different kind of discourse for that matter. Then we have certain areas of translation where accuracy happens to be the topmost priority. For example, we have technology, medicine, and law. See, about technology, we have, for example, an automated teller machine. If that machine is fed with certain wrong terms, certain wrong translation, we understand that that machine would be giving out the notes of currency, currency notes, etc. Then what we exactly expect. For example, if there's a wrong language put inside this machine, and maybe 100 word replaces 2000 2000 currency, the word that is meant for 2000 rupees currency, and when we press that button, instead of 100 currency notes, we would start getting 2000 rupee notes. So this happens. That is why we require terminological accuracy in the area of technology, medicine, and law. Medicine, we all understand any kind of wrong thing can lead to dire and serious consequences. It is the same case of law. The language of law highly demands accuracy there. Without accuracy, that language cannot bring about proper justice. Then interpreting, I would like to briefly discuss this idea of interpreting. We have two types of interpretation. One is consecutive and the other is simultaneous. Consecutive translation is always part of informal meetings towards business negotiations, etc. For example, two people meet for a business and their languages are different. Then interpreter plays a vital role there. And as we see, we have certain meetings of multinational companies where interpreters play a very important role. Not only that, we also have, tours, and the business of tourism, where interpreters are very much required. If we go to a place like Maqbara in Aurangabad or Ajanta Caves or Ellora Caves, without an interpreter, the foreigners visiting those caves cannot get understood the overall background of, say, the caves. And that is why we find that interpreter happens to be a must in regard with, say, these areas of work, for example, informal meetings, tours, business negotiations, etc. Well, there's a film called Sing is Bling, and a British character travels from London to Goa, and another one is from Goa, and there's problem of language, and that lady functions as an interpreter. That creates a lot of funny scenes in that film. I think that can be understood as an example of what happens when certain wrong things have been put as a matter of interpretation. Then this is how consecutive interpretation works. One person speaks continuously and the other keeps on translating what is being said by that speaker. And then here, there are certain limitations, like the interpreter has to wait until the speaking is finished or till the retention capacity of that interpreter. So there are pauses and gaps, and then that meaning can be spread. Then we have simultaneous interpreting as well. For example, we have here direct participation in consecutive interpreting, whereas here it is not a direct participation or the case of direct participation. And here we have the use of technical equipment like headsets and that are connected to multi-channels. For example, in a language laboratory or in a computer laboratory, this exercise can be undertaken. So at the same time, many people can be listening to the speaker, to the interpreter. So speaker and interpreters can be listened to this way. And here, there is a delay in presentation and there's time to understand the things. Whereas consecutive is a quick activity, simultaneous interpreting is not that quick an activity. So these are again the two types. So this is into practice itself. And I have also taken up challenges to share with you. I shall move on to them very soon. We have sometimes subjective factors that enter the area of interpretation. I remember when Mahendra Singh Dhoni had spoken at Mumbai in English, because earlier we had people having communicated in English, and Dhoni had simply said, well, both English and Marathi have been covered, so I would like to express myself in Hindi. So this kind of statement was clearly mentioned by Mahendra Singh Dhoni when India had won that inaugural T20 World Cup under his captaincy. At the very next moment, on a news channel like Aaj Tak, the headline was, "मैं हिंदुस्तानी हूँ, हिंदी में ही बोलूँगा." You just understand how these interpreters make a mess of the situations. I witnessed Mahendra Singh Dhoni's practical communication and its interpretation on a news channel like the so-called India's Sarvasreshth channel, I mean the best channel. And we understand what kind of headlines this channel keeps on giving, the latest example being that of Sushant Singh Rajput. Hit wicket kaise ho gaye? I mean, hit wicket kaise ho gaye? I mean, see, this happens when there are subjective factors applied. Anyway, then we have imitation of sounds. Sometimes when we try to imitate the sounds, we, can lose the contents. See, there are poems. When a translator tries to translate those poems, for example, an English poem to be translated into Hindi or Marathi, at that time, we have the phonemic translation to be focused. And the rhyming pattern, if the translator tries to follow that rhyming pattern in that translation, then there would be the loss of contents, because translation is an activity which can be understood on the grounds of that saying, pains and gains, or say, when you start gaining something in that process, you also start losing something. So at the same time, you cannot have everything adopted that way. And that is why sometimes when we focus upon imitation of sounds, there's greater possibility that we would lose the contents. And not only that, we also have certain absolutes. There are certain harsh rules, there are certain absolutes that have been recommended for the process of translation, but they can, of course, damage the interest of actual translation. Now here I am to share with you certain challenges. For example, fidelity to the original. What is original has to be maintained. This is the common expectation. But how can we maintain the original? That becomes a big challenge. When it comes to practice, this happens to be one of the biggest challenges in the process of translation. For example, we have the limits of intercultural understanding, dialect and subculture. I'll plainly tell you that the people that usually live in the cosmopolitan or metropolitan areas, or particularly those that have been born and brought up in those areas, I doubt can translate dialectal texts in a satisfactory way, because dialect has been radically different from what is called the standard language of any, say, region, any country, any nation, etc. So here, unless and until that translator becomes part of that culture and understands it. See, we have a person called Alok Mukherjee, who had come to Maharashtra, lived with Sharan Kumar Limbare, and discussed a lot many things, having got understood many aspects of Dalit culture and culture of Maharashtra. He went for a translation like an aesthetic of Dalit literature. This can help. So what I mean to say is there are limitations of intercultural understanding. This is again another challenge that we find. And when there's a wrong translation, it has serious lasting consequences. And what are these? Let us see this way. For example, we have Dr. Ambedkar's 3 words: educate, agitate, and organize. Actually, instead of the last agitate, it should be organize. That is my mistake. Then, how this misunderstanding has caused great damage to the people, let us see. Actually, educate has been translated into Marathi and Hindi as Shika, Shikshit Bano respectively, whereas that meaning is nowhere near this educate, and the people have always misunderstood it as Shika or Shikshit Bano, educate. And what is the meaning of educate? Give intellectual, moral, and social instruction to someone, typically at a school or university. I mean, this is the meaning of educate. I have derived this definition from Oxford Lexicon. And what is the meaning of agitate? Make someone troubled or nervous. This is number 1. Stir or disturb. This is number 2. And I have put in blue the actual meaning that was expected by Dr. Ambedkar. This can be considered as the highest possibility. Campaign to arouse public concern about an issue in the hope of prompting action. So where's the campaign? Now, a month ago, an engineer had come to me and started discussing this issue. He said Dr. Ambedkar had asked, by way of using this word, that is agitate, to chetavine. I mean, this is what he said. Dr. Ambedkar meant chetava. I mean, agitate. Actually, he has never meant that. And just suppose that educate was properly translated, agitate was properly translated, possibly the people would have taken to the task of educating others besides getting educated. But this meaning remained limited to, get educated, and the people could not see anything beyond that. And this is what actually a serious wrong happens like. And then we have agitate. Even agitate is not properly understood. It's a kind of campaign to arouse public concern, but the people haven't understood it even today. And this happens when a wrong translation has been inculcated in the minds of people. So translation, proper, appropriate, accurate translation always matters. This is what actually I meant by giving this example. Another challenge, there's a textbook called The Prince by Machiavelli, which is considered as the Bible of political science. In that text, the translator Adams has written this. He said, occasionally to ruler or governor, a last long-standing problem in translating Machiavelli is posed by the word virtue. Virtue. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Virtue, which can mean anything from strength, ability, courage, manliness, or ingenuity, to character, wisdom, or even last resort, virtue. Now, when one word gives us so many meanings and still the translator is not able to determine which one exact, just imagine what kind of trouble a translator has to undergo. So this is a very big challenge to find the closest equivalent to the words, or the closest equivalent to a very important word from that text. This is the true test of the translator's character. This is again a very big challenge that comes in when we start practicing translation. Now, this is a very interesting area. I mean, false friends. I have deliberately chosen a few examples to put to you. And I thought of dealing with Hindi and Marathi simultaneously so that it can become quite appealing to, say, you, as you happen to be either from a Hindi background or Marathi background, for that matter. I know there are other languages as well that are your mother tongue or vernaculars, etc. But still, I think this comparison between Hindi and Marathi can be reachable. That is why I have chosen it. See, there's a word in Hindi called chesta. The same word is there in Marathi as well. Whereas in Hindi, chesta means to try, to attempt, and an effort. In Marathi, what it means is something quite unusual. To annoy, to mock, to ridicule, or to jeer. For example, a Marathi speaker or a person whose mother tongue is Marathi is trying to translate a Hindi text into Marathi under the consideration that the words like chesta have the similar meaning in, say, Hindi and Marathi. Then just imagine what could be the consequence of this translation. We have another word called parat. Parat in Hindi is a layer or coating, whereas it is to come back or return in Marathi. Andaz is style or manner in Hindi, whereas it is a guess, or to guess, to deduce, or to surmise. Just imagine the difference of meaning. We have another word called Shraddhanjali, which is homage or obeisance. I mean, this can be taken as a quantronym in Hindi, because in Hindi, Shraddhanjali is the word that is used on both the occasions, birth anniversary and death anniversary. That is the typical example. That is a typical example from Hindi. So we can take it for a quantronym that way. Quantronym is a word that has both the meanings, I mean, positive as well as negative. And then we have tribute. Mostly it is tribute in Marathi, Abhivadan, etc. Then we have rag, which is passion, attachment, and melody. And it is not anger in Hindi. Rag is never anger in Hindi, but in Marathi, mostly it is anger, vexation, and annoyance. Just see the difference. We have samadhan. I mean, this is again a word that we should think of. Samadhan is solution or resolution in Hindi. It is never satisfaction or contentment as it is in Marathi. See the difference. We have another word called pravartan, and it is enforcement and actuation in Hindi. We know Pravartan Nideshalaya, enforcement directorate. And in Marathi, it is foundation as well as behavior. It is nowhere enforcement. I have actually accessed Hindi and Marathi dictionaries, and out of them I have come across these interpretations. Then there's a word called Raz, which is secret and mystery. Whereas in Marathi, it is rule, control, command. See the difference. Now, as I said, there is a mention of nature or types of false friends. One is synchronic, and the other diachronic, interlingual, and intralingual. Again, this is a challenge for a translator to maintain the exact essence of, both the languages. And then we have intralingual. For example, we have padna. Padna is always to fall or to confront, etc. And girna is always to drop. I mean, there is a difference. I mean, although meaning seems to be similar, actually it is not so. Girna is always to drop. See, for example, when the Maharashtrians communicate in Hindi, they say, "Are yaar wo bimar gir gaya." This is not the appropriate translation of someone's falling ill. So padna and girna is a word that actually not only has a meaning like to drop, but it also has a very bad meaning or insulting meaning. I mean, gir gaye ho. I mean, you just try to understand. And then we have, I mean, kisi ke nazron se girna, etc. I meant it. Raj can be considered as like an oxymoron. I mean, it is a rule as well as it is a secret. So these are the two things. Rule is open, secret is hidden. So these are the false friends one has to look after and deal with, which pose a lot many challenges to the translator. Then we have let us have examples from English language, the English language. We have diachronic intralingual false friends. See, language is always studied diachronically and synchronically, and we cannot study it simply diachronically or simply say synchronically. Both the processes automatically come into the study of a language. Diachronic intralingual false friends always belong to history from one period to another. How? Let us see. We have a case of this word that is nice. During the 13th century, this word meant simple, silly, or ignorant. In the 14th, it got changed its meaning: wanton, loose-mannered, and lascivious. 13th century meaning is better as compared to that of the 14th. But still, we have again the third stage of its replacement of meaning. In modern sense or in the current day situation, we have the meaning of nice as friendly, agreeable, and pleasing. Just imagine someone talks to us in an ironic fashion and maybe has the intention of making use of the word of the 13th century, I mean, meaning of the 13th century. Maybe someone says, to use the 13th century term, you are a nice person. You just imagine what could be, say, the consequence of this. But if the listener has that consciousness, by then that listener can understand what the speaker exactly means, and that irony, that derision, everything then comes into understanding. Then we have change of language. It is said that every language gets completely changed after 2,500 years. Every word of it gets changed on the basis of its meaning, interpretation, etc. And change is the law of nature. There's a textbook by, say, F.T. Wood and Thomas Cable called The History of English Language. And there is a mention of Grimm's Law. And Grimm's Law tells us how one word gets its spellings changed in the course of time. And that is a very fine description that we find into that text. Well, let us say how change comes in place. There's a word called artist, which is German, and it means somebody performing an art. Now it becomes the true friend in English, but time has narrowed its meaning down to acrobat. And artist means as an acrobat now. Although the spelling is the same, meaning is radically different. So initially it had a broad level meaning, somebody performing an art, and it matched that of English word. But Here again, it got narrowed down to acrobat, and then it turned from a true friend into the false one. This is how the translator is faced with challenges. Then there's another term, which can be considered again an example of, say, broadening of the words. Really Syrian. This is again a German term, and there's Italian, really sa. This is Italian, and the meaning of both being to make. See, today the meaning of both the meanings have been influenced by the English realize, which means to comprehend. And now this word or these words have become true friends. This is again a challenge. We do understand that English is a language, 80% of whose vocabulary has been derived from hundreds of languages of the world. It has nothing original, at least up to 80%. And we know that the rest of the influence is that of Latin. And see the structure of English. Even if English is possibly the most hybrid language of the world, it has influenced even the classical and prestigious languages of the world. And that is, in fact, the greatness of English, which has been hated in certain countries or many countries still, which is functioning as a prerequisite. This is the beauty of this language, because English is possibly the most flexible language around the world, which is why it is able to influence, say, other languages of the world. See, another case of false friends is before you. There's a dangerous assumption to have that inflammable is an opposite of flammable. Because we very often find that there are certain prefixes like in, im, etc. that help us form the opposites of the words that we deal with. But here it is not a case. There are the meanings I have derived from these two dictionaries. For example, from Cambridge, it is the meaning number one is describe something that burns very easily, inflammable. Second meaning is likely to become violent or angry very quickly and in an uncontrolled way. So these are the two definitions of inflammable, and the definition of flammable is like this. It describes something that burns easily, which actually has absolute equivalence with the first meaning in the previous word, that is inflammable. And what Oxford Dictionary says about this is, see, inflammable looks an opposite of flammable, but in fact it has the same meaning. However, flammable is much more frequent than inflammable and carries less risk of the meaning being confused. So there's always a confusion between these two words, not only around the world, but even amongst the native speakers of English. Whereas flammable is defined by Oxford Dictionary as that can burn easily, which means both the words have the same meaning, but there's still a confusion maintained. And about false friends, Christoph Gutnecht, actually he has produced a very good essay upon translation. I have derived most of the things from that. The fact that false friends sound alike often leads to the incorrect assumption that they have the same meaning. However, that's sometimes only partially the case and often not at all. So false friends apparently look as if they are in a position to share the same meaning, identical meaning, but it is not the case. And here we have an example of England, where inflammable and say non-flammable actually have been wrongly used. It is non-flammable, but it has been printed as on-flammable. Kindly pardon this. What this quote actually means is, even in England, the same kind of confusion persists. And that is why a linguistic organization appealed to the people to drop the use of inflammable. And they asked the people to make use of this word that is flammable to the maximum. See, if the linguistic agencies share such kinds of concerns, just think of what might be happening to the translator when translating the things. And we have certain more challenges like polysemy, synonymy, contronyms, homonyms, equivocalness, context. Can the translator successfully deal with this? Then if they can, then that is going to be a beautiful work of translation, of course. And second thing, we always hear about, certain translations from around the world. For example, whenever we want Homer's translation, because Homer wrote in Greek, and we do not understand Greek. And to understand Homer, we usually go for that universal name, and it is Chapman. And the people would say, I need a copy of Chapman's Homer. So certain translators have their own identity this way, because these people have overcome almost all the challenges to bring in the beauty of the original work, for example, that of Homer and others. And we also have another example in relation to the Bible. King James Version, that has been on the top demand. It is on top demand. Why? Because most of the people believe that this version of the Bible has been the most trustworthy. So these are the cases how translation becomes a prestige. Cases of how translation becomes a matter of prestige. And then there are certain uncultured words as well. And what are they? For example, we have Landers, who says uncultured words are the ones spoken by peasants and the illiterates. Now, an educated person or maybe a highly trained translator cannot successfully deal with this. Unless and until that translator becomes part of the environs of these people, the peasants and the illiterates. And then we have, for example, the change of address. See, as I already mentioned, the language of the peasants and rural backdrop has been intricate, has been unfamiliar. So the translator need have great precaution while translating the things related to that. See, a friend of mine has written a play, and in that play, there's a word called Wangan. And he had shared this experience with me. He said, an English professor met him, wanted to translate that text, and that translator came to him, and she said, well, I do not understand the meaning of this word that is Wangan. He said, Wangan is just an example. There are many such words in my text, which may be beyond your understanding. And then possibly that lady, left out translating that text. This is what, a friend of mine, creative writer, had shared with me. Anyway, we have change of address, race, ethnicity, etc. For example, some people call the Arabs as Arabe. In certain contexts, this is acceptable, but in most of them, it is not. Similar case like Jew, for the Jews. In certain contexts, acceptable, and in most of them, not acceptable at all. The similar case with Negro, that is also pointed out. Then by Clifford Landers. Then there are possibilities. I would like to now move on to the possibilities. Actually, this is a very interesting area I wish to deal with for a long time, but I have to respect the time constraint. What are the possibilities? Transfer of knowledge from one people to the other. This is possibility number one. Reaching classics from one nation to the other. See, we have classical works. For example, we have Shakespeare's plays. Now, whether to call them classical or not, or whether to call them classics or not, again is a matter of debate and argument. But then when Shakespeare has occupied, or since Shakespeare has occupied space at almost every college of the world, we can go for that name just to exemplify our case. So the case in point is Shakespeare has come to us in the form of the plays like Natasamrat. Why? Because of translation. So this classic work, I mean, A.C. Bradley has called it in his Shakespearean tragedy as a great tragedy. And others have criticized, calling it as not great. Whatever the debate and argument and understanding, let us keep it aside and get understood. At least we could understand Natasamrat by the way of translation, or say traveling by the vehicle of translation. Then we have training of the people linguistically. The people are linguistically trained and the people can be multilingual that way. Then it is again a matter of development of systems of commerce, politics, livelihood. It also bridges cultural and linguistic gaps. This is another possibility that we can concentrate upon when dealing with translation. Then we have bringing in close communication and interpretation. This we discussed, and better relationship can be created with the help of translation. These are the possibilities. Polysystem, I would like to say, is something that deals with the economic, intellectual, and social opportunities. Multilingual interaction, understanding literary, linguistic, and cultural canons, interface with the Dutch, German, Belgian, Russian, Anglo-American. See, most of these ideas are related to the conditions of Israel. Israel is a country that has to mostly depend upon, say, the countries that are mentioned here, like Dutch, German, etc., for the sake of taking their international relations at a higher level. And that is why we find that the system of translation called polysystem has come into existence, which came coined or introduced by Itmar Ivan Zor. And he has based his theory of polysystem on Russian formalists. And what is this polysystem? Let us get understood. Actually, it is the entire network of correlated systems. It is literary as well as extra-literary. And these theories presume that the social norms and literary conventions in the receiving culture, which are the target systems, govern the aesthetic presuppositions of the translator and thus influence ensuing translation decisions. Polysystem is nothing but getting collected multicultures. It is just like a method which was used by Matthew Arnold in his criticism, and he used the term called touchstone. So touchstone method was used for critical theory or literary criticism by Matthew Arnold, whereas a system like polysystem, a theory like polysystem theory has been used by this theorist for the sake of facilitating the ways of translation. And what is there? It is an attempt to explain the function of all kinds of writing within a given culture, from the central canonical texts to the most marginal non-canonical texts. When your language is marginal, you have to depend upon the canon. You have to depend upon the established culture of translation, without which you cannot take, yourselves into the flight of, development. And that is what the attempt of polysystem has been. Then there are certain personal experiences. I shall just speak of them and rest my point. See, I have translated some poems. I have been translating a book, and I have translated an essay as well. And hereafter, there are certain proposals from friends that I translate certain important works by them. Yes, translation would be coming. And since I happen to be part of the area of translation as a practitioner, I think I could, give you an insider's view this way. See, while translating poems, it is very difficult to maintain the meter of, poem. meter and rhyming pattern pose great challenges. Book, if it is in the prose form, maybe you are a bit comfortable, but it is not always the case. See, I have been translating a book called Dr. Ambedkar for Non-Dalits by Mr. Lulekar. In that book, right in the beginning, he has used a word called, say, Kaiwari. As Dr. Ambedkar has been limited to Dalits, and he has been very often referred to as Dalitanche Kaiwari. I mean, someone who is fighting for the case of Dalits, etc. I mean, that is a limited understanding that has been developed amongst the people by certain elements. And here, he has quite clarified that concept. I like that way of clarification. He said, this is in fact a kind of great prank committed by the people to limit Dr. Ambedkar's identity. Anyway, so this word Kaiwari troubled me so much that I had to think it over, maybe for 15 minutes, sometimes 20 minutes. I referred to Apte's Marathi Shabda Ratnakar. I referred to the internet. I also talked to some people, but I was not getting closer to the meaning. There are also other words like Pudhari and Neta, etc. I mean, minute differences are there. So while dealing with this word that is Kaiwari, I had to struggle a lot. So even an essay, Dr. Ambedkar's essay, I translated way back. Today, when I look back to it, I don't find that I could translate it up to my satisfaction today. But at that time, I did it maybe a decade ago. But while translating that essay, which ran into maybe 5 pages at the most, it took a lot of time for me to reach at the meanings. And still, I'm not sure if I was able to find the closest equivalents. And since every of his word and sentence has been highly philosophical, it has been a very, very tough task. It has been a big challenge to translate him. So there are many writers of this kind. For example, we have the poets like Grace that are very difficult to understand, interpret, and translate as well. And that is how we find that translation becomes a very challenging activity. Anyway, I have also got a signal that I stop here. I have finished talking. There are so many things to talk about translation, yet I would like to say that I was really so happy to be part of this webinar as a speaker. And my heartfelt gratitude goes to Dr. Gajanan Zadav, the Honorable Principal of Sri Venkatesh College, Deolgaon Raja in the first place. And of course, a similar gratitude goes to Dr. Sudhir Chauhan and his team for having me, as a speaker, invited to this session. So again, I cannot forget the audience, because without audience, no speaker can have the facility or luxury of, speaking. And I am really much, much grateful to every member from the audience for having listened to me with the perfect concentration. Although this is all virtual, even my virtual understanding of them is that they have listened to me quite carefully and with full concentration. So I'm so much grateful to them as well. And again, thanking everyone, greatly, I would like to say, yes, it is a great privilege, pleasure for me to be part of this. And thank you one and all. I take my seat back here. Yes, if there are questions, I would be happy to receive them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. There is one question, and for this, I would like to request Pawan, sir, to please read out the question.
Sir, there is one question
Yes,
from
please.
our principal, sir. So I request principal, sir, to ask the question.
Okay.
पंडित सर नमस्कार.
सर नमस्कार.
थोडंसं आजारी असल्यामुळे तुमच्या याच्यात सहभागी होता आला नाही.
हो सर, तुमची अनुपस्थिती जाणवली सर मला.
नाही, तब्येत थोडीशी बरी नव्हती
हा.
2-3 दिवसापासून.
Yes, sir.
आणि फारच सुंदर झालं सर, अप्रतिम.
Thank you very
अतिशय
much.
अभ्यासपूर्ण नेहमीच्या पद्धतीने झालं. पूर्ण एक ना एक शब्द मी ऐकला.
Thank you
मला
very much,
फक्त
sir.
एकच नेहमी मला स्वतःला जाणवणारा एक जो प्रश्न आहे,
Yes, sir.
जो या व्याख्यानाच्याही अनुषंगाने असू शकेल, की आपण भावानुवादाकडे गेलं पाहिजे की आपण अनुवादाकडे गेलं पाहिजे. त्याचं कारण असं आहे की तुम्ही आता काही उदाहरणं दिली की नटसम्राटची दिली किंवा आपल्या लोलेकर सरांचं पुस्तक आहे.
हो.
तर ही खूप उदाहरणं तुम्ही दिलीत.
हो, sir.
माझा एक नेहमी प्रश्न आहे की आपण एखाद्या ग्रंथाचा जर अनुवाद करायचा की भावानुवाद करायचा. समजा आमचा चोखा आहे, तर चोख्याचा एक अभंग असा आहे की उस डोंगा परी रस नव्हे डोंगा. आता या डोंगाचं काय करायचं इंग्रजी? तो आपल्या वैदर्भीय भाषेचा लहेजा घेऊन आलेला शब्द आहे.
हो.
तर मग ही अडचण नेहमीच होते सर. प्रत्येक भाषेला एक स्वतःची संस्कृती असते, परंपरा असते.
येस सर.
आणि विशिष्ट अशा प्रकारचा एक लहेजा असतो. तर मग आपण भावानुवादाकडे जास्त गेलं पाहिजे की आपण अनुवादाकडे गेलं पाहिजे? मला असं वाटतं की नटसम्राट यशस्वी ठरलं, त्याचं कारण त्यांनी फक्त आधार घेतला आणि पूर्ण मराठी संस्कृती, मराठी भाषा, मराठी परंपरा याचा आधार घेऊन ते नव्यानं कुसुमाग्रजांनी, शिरवाडकरांनी ते बसवलं, म्हणून ते मोठ्या प्रमाणात यशस्वी झालं असू शकेल. तर प्लीज सर, तुमचं मत तुम्ही. सर.
थँक्यू व्हेरी मच सर. आणि सर्वप्रथम आपल्याला
इंग्रजीमध्ये सांगा सर, इंग्रजीमध्ये सांगितलं चालेल, बाकीच्या आपल्या लोकांना ते कळेल, बाहेरच्या भाषेतले.
येस सर. First of all, I wish you get well soon, sir. Please take care of yourself. And I'm happy that you have listened to me. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir. You have spoken about Bhavanuvad and you have also spoken about Natasamrat. See, Natasamrat does not carry many of the new ideas. I mean, that has been what the subject of criticism has been about Natasamrat. And it has been said that he has picked up the theme as it was and applied it with slight changes and making certain changes of language that way. I mentioned Natasamrat just for the sake of clearing my point that the people could understand that there is King Lear because of this Natasamrat. I mean that was my point. Anyway. Well, sir, the point that you have raised it quite relevant and important as well, because Bhavanuvad is something that has to be, maintained. Maintained in the sense, every translation and as I have spoken about, polysystem theory. Polysystem theory tells us that we have to also apply diversity, or say what we can say cultural aspects of the texts that carry them. So when we go for cultural aspects, at that time we not only have translation on the level of language, but we also have the carriers of emotions that is also there. And the problem here, however, is that no translation can be perfect. No translation can go up to 100%, because there are certain languages that have their own limitations. And also these languages have been quite disparate. For example, English and Marathi, they are not that much related as we find English related to the languages like German, French, say Italian or Latin languages for that matter. And English also has access to each and every language. For example, even Marathi words have been derived by English language into it, which means to some extent, there may be a possibility of, say, 80 or 90% of translation into an English text, or maybe from into a Marathi text from English into Marathi or vice versa. But then when it comes to the term called Bhavanuvad, there's no guarantee that it would be coming there, up to the levels of expectation. So it is important, rather than going for Bhavanuvad only or say word for word translation only, it would be better for us to maintain, a balance between both. So that could be a way out, in my opinion. If we go for only say Bhavanuvad, then we are sure to miss certain other, important connections of that text. And if we go for language only, then again, we would miss the cultural, emotional factors from that text. So there's always a danger of missing something important. So that way, it is better to maintain balance of, both the aspects. By then, it can come out as a satisfactory work of translation. This is how I can respond to your questions, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. So, excellent illustration was given so that the meaning, origin, process of translation, the way people are interpreting the meanings or the words, and the challenges, possibilities while the translation is going on. Actually, we all were enthralled and engrossed in your explanation. So thank you very much for such an insightful and thoughtful information. Thank you once again, sir.
Thank you very much, madam. Are there any more questions?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Once again.
Thank you, madam.
Now we are moving to our plenary session 1. And for this, again, I request all the participants, if they have got any questions, to put their questions in the chat box. I would like to request today's eminent, elegant speaker, Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble, sir, Associate Professor, English and Foreign Language, University, Hyderabad, to enlighten us. Over to you, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
I don't know. Should I begin with thanking Dr. Milind Pandit for his nice, very illustrious, very scholarly, lucid, very simple, and very well researched, very well organized keynote address. It was.
Thank you very much, sir.
It was a pleasure to listen to him. I hope he has satisfied all the expectations which Dr. Sudhir had from you. And I hope all the participants will also appreciate this. They will communicate. Okay, I take this opportunity to thank the college, Sri Venkatesh Arts and Commerce Science College, Devurgaon Raja, and the management. And I just heard the principal also. I heard from Sudhir that he is not well, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
we also, yeah.
Yes,
so
yes.
we hope he will be well soon, and I wish him good health. So I thank him, Dr. Gajanan Jadhav. Then I thank Dr. Bhalirao. I thank then people from the college. I am not good, so I'm reading the names from the. Okay, we have never met also. Hopefully we'll meet. Manjusha, Jyoti, Dr. Jyoti, Dr. Manjusha. And I would also like to thank, finally, Dr. Sudhir Chavan. We have had a long association. In fact, I owe a lot to him. My research began with him. He took me to my supervisor, Professor Pandey sir, to Nagpur. He used to help me a lot. So my beginning in the research is I owe this all journey to him. And so thank you for inviting. But I also congratulate that very rarely we see, I mean, a webinar then organized by a college there, and then you have a very relevant topic, like, you know, it has been very well designed also. Like, you know, we all have been dealing with translations, translated texts and all, and sometimes we take many things for granted. But we have to also understand, you know, how the discipline works, which Dr. Pandit has actually made us, you know, he made everything visible. Like when you engage in the activity, you don't deal with the text. You have to also understand, you have to also critically examine the way you deal with the texts. And that's what, you know, he explained. My presentation is on, I did my PhD on women's plays in translation. So while doing that, I didn't understand many things, but even after the PhD was over, I continued dealing with them and all. As a discipline, I didn't study translation studies and all, but I always dealt with those questions that, you know, what is lost in the translation or what is gained in the translation, or how a researcher can shape, recover, present the things which were there at the time of writing in the source language, and when they are translated into a target language, especially in English for a different audience, and especially the performances. So I was also fascinated by this intersection of, like, you know, women writers choosing to write in their mother tongues first, second choosing a genre of performance. uh, I mean, that's also a problematic thing, because when I was reading, I was analyzing and putting it into the presentation for the PhD. All the time I had to really grapple with those questions, and why performance? In fact, I still remember, and I tell this to my students also, like, you know, when I was facing the research registration committee, I shouldn't be telling this, but now I'm, like, you know, safely away, so I can tell. Some plays are, like, you know, 4 page or something, and they are not play, like, you know, form is completely different. So one of the members in the research registration committee says, is this a play? It is not a play. These are 4 pages, and where are the characters? All that. I couldn't answer then very satisfactorily. I knew that it is very much the act of subversion when somebody takes it up to write as a performance, then, and the very subject of the writer is to subvert or to challenge. So obviously she has decided to challenge the form also. Why should she write in the form which is given to her by a male playwright? So I couldn't defend, I couldn't convince people then, but I'm convinced now that, you know, it was a play. It is a play of the experience and all. So I am taking these intersections into consideration, and I'm presenting it in the form of the challenges which the research scholars, or as a researcher, we face when we deal with the translated texts. Text specifically built on the experiences of the writer, basically, or about the person, I mean, the whose life is written in the play. Should I share my screen now? Shall I start?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I have titled it like this, you know, experience, performance, and translation, challenges in the research on plays by Indian women playwrights. I'm just putting these things, I mean, I'm taking this intersection, how these texts are based on the experiences of women, or about the women who they are talking about. They choose to write in performances in their mother tongues. And then when they are translated and we read Mostly, I'm talking about the English translations. What kind of challenges the research scholar or a researcher faces? I'm putting my argument like this. Uh, Research on a translated text always pushes the horizons, especially when the text under consideration is based on someone's experiences. For this presentation, I am taking up how a researcher locates experiences in the translated texts. In their source language, they are also meant to be performed. I also specify, I'll talk about why and how these intersections work, or how they trouble the researcher, or how the researcher has to be conscious about that so that he or she can extract more and more meaning from it to substantiate the point of the writer or translator or his own or her own. I also specify the experiences which are critical for the being of the person whose experiences the said text bears. Now, study of Indian women's plays in translation makes us curious towards questions about, and these are the questions that we grapple, or I also grapple with, how women's experiences are documented, the form or the genre they choose to write, subjects they prefer to write about, their claim for a subject position in relation to history of performance from which they are absent. They were physically absent from the history of performance. And the assessment of their absent in the sense even when they were present, history is not, documented of their presence satisfactorily, consistently. The assessment of their creativity in their source language, how it happens. So a researcher is always curious about, or should be curious, in my opinion, should be curious about these things as well. While locating the experiences in translated text in the target language, in relation to their context and histories in source language, the researcher is challenged by multiple possibilities of interpretations. If a researcher doesn't confine his or her attention only to the written text or the translated text in front of him or her, and if he decides to go beyond these, matrices, then actually we can find many interesting interpretations beyond the texts. Irrespective of the question whether the translations are enabling or disciplining in this exercise, the researcher is expected to contextualize and visualize the experiences of the person whose testimonials they are and read, the criticality and the difference. How I, locate the text, and when I say experience in text. So the question is locating the experience in text in transition. So I try to put the text in proper perspective, how it happens. Now, what was the challenge? To locate the text first, recovering the experience. Academician, mostly, the plays which I read, they were translated by academicians to English. They are read and researched by academicians and the scholars. And if they are performed in front of highly sophisticated audience in cities and proper theater going audiences. Now, what I understood while reading these texts, the assumed positions of translators make certain parts of experiences abstract. And they are likely to become more abstract with each stage of transition. So, as I said, experience in text in translation, there are various transitions. It's not only the translation, but the translation into performance, and then performance appreciation, into film, into research paper, there are various transitions. So after each transition, what happens to this experience? Does it become more and more abstract, more and more removed from, or are we going away from the original experience as such? I'm sure I'm not claiming also that my job is to say that I'm able to go to the original experience as such and all. That's not possible, but at least I can try and attempt to go as close as possible to the experience, and that's the business of the writer. the writer who is writing about that experience. That's what he or she wants people to understand. I'm here talking about especially those texts whose business is about experiences. Like, they want to talk about, and you can call it autobiographies, memoirs, or plays based on especially about the experiences and all. And something this I found very fascinating about the women's plays. Even the form of the plays had an experiential turn. They were based on, and forms also changed. They adapted actually the theater form to suit, to convey, to communicate their experiences. Now, also think about, I mean, again, another question that I confront is experience and temporality. There is always a temporal difference in evaluation of the intensity of experience. Think about, I'm just giving few examples. Anguish Against Dowry and Widow Remarriage had, I mean, they had a different meaning across time. Earlier, when it was there as a major, issue and discussion, along with others. I'm just selecting a few issues so that we can understand how the intensity is different across time. Think about women's liberation, Mopsiker's Mulgi Zaliho. Now, it's also fascinating, like, as the meaning of the issue changes, the terms of the issue also change. I mean, women's liberation also will have a new meaning, new terms now. Mulgi Zaliho will be still relevant after suitable adaptations, because it will still be talking about liberation, which is not complete. There is another play, Tripurari Sharma's play in Hindi, Kaat Ki Gadi. In English, it is translated as The Wooden Cart. Now it's about leprosy and stigmatization, played in 70s, 80s, and 90s under the umbrella of World Health Organization to create awareness about leprosy and all. Now, leprosy may not be a serious issue today because of the lower incidence. I'm not saying it's gone and all, but an interesting dimension of this play would be relevant because it talks about, because it brings an issue like, stigmatization of the person because of the disease. We have seen that in 90s and 2000 about AIDS, disease and stigmatization. So even when we may not be able to relate to leprosy, but the issue is actually different. It is the issue is stigmatization of the person due to the disease. Now, if we concentrate on this while talking about the translated text, we actually go beyond what the text is in front of us. Not only we go and see, how leprosy and the stigmatization work, but we also can relate to how stigmatization can work. And that's basically the purpose of the text, to make us see through the process of stigmatization, understand it, and understand the experience of the person who is in front of us. The play doesn't talk about him, but the play still talks about him or her. Also, it has, what I realized while reading these plays and women's writing, it's always related to space. We have often seen, for example, I'll give one or two examples. They are not related to translations. Sandra Cessner is a Mexican-American writer. She has written this book, The House on Mango Street. So search for space of her own is pervasive throughout the text. I'll quote her. She says, in one of the chapters, not a flat, not an apartment in back, not a man's house, not a daddy's, a house all my own, only a house quiet as snow, a space for myself to go, clean as paper before the poem. Clean is without the legacy of anybody. And will I get that? Like that, I have seen many examples. I mean, I often said this, like, will there be a difference when we talk about Bildungsroman or coming of age novel? will there be a difference between a coming of age narrative of a boy and a girl? And there is, boy is owner of the, like, I mean, look at the way they are situated in home. Boy is a carrier of the legacy, boy is the future owner of the home, and you know, the girl is said that you don't belong to this place. तुम्हारा घर यहाँ नहीं है, ये तुझा घर नहीं है, तुझा घर दुसरीकडे आहे. Right, it begins from that you don't belong to this place, and this begins since childhood. So whatever experiences about the world she gains, or for example, like, you know, boys are asked to learn things so that you know, acquire the skills, and then their life will be you know, a bank of those skills. They are useful for their life and all. Whereas for girls, people say, you don't do this, this time doesn't belong to you, after 7 you have to be at home, this sports is not for you, this book is not for you. Just think about when she grows, she may be saying, I mean, it's all not experience, you know, putting together so that I get the knowledge. In fact, it is based on Sissy, you know, seeding the knowledge, you know, giving up the knowledge about the place, about the time, about this, about that, and all. There is basically the difference. Same difference I found in women's writing, women's plays also. I'll just give one example. One of my students, Kapil Sagrolikar, he submitted, he is awarded also his thesis, Singing the Tradition and Grinding the Culture, which he studied grind mill songs, Marathi, Zatyavacha Ovya. So he studied those things. Now these experiences of women, when he was translating all these songs and all, what we noticed was he's talking about those experiences which are rooted to a particular place and particular activity. Now these spaces indicate confinement, so many things, you know, muffled voices, repetitive nature of activities, creativity and productivity as well. But it has this particular experience of singing about everything, like joys and sorrows, and about their wishes to go back to the maternal homes, ability to go, inability to go, all those things. They are rooted to a particular space. So when these things are translated, do we also do justice to the experiences rooted in the space? Do we think about that? I'll also give one example from the plays that I read. Vinodini, she is a Telugu writer. Her play Daham, that is thirst. It's based on, like, you know, a village assembly situation where Dalits fight for the right for water. They are prevented by the Reddy's upper caste, and you know, different kinds of tricks are played so that they shouldn't be going to the well and they shouldn't be touching the well, so that there's no question of asking or claiming for the water. Now, see, I mean, it's very rooted. Anybody who understands the village situation and the caste hierarchy and the power play will understand every meaning of the every word. What to, how to, like, you know, how to describe this precarity. The moment we change the location, like, you know, you come to the city, you have a precarity of a different kind, but not the same kind. Now, what happens there? They bid, like Dalit women's bid for democratizing the space. In fact, after the quarrel, they have an assembly, and then they argue well democratically that, you know, how they justify their claims for the water equally with the others and the resources. Now, they engage with the caste-ridden rural space by using the village assembly setup. There is a democratic argument with the help of binary position of the two communities. And they constantly use these words are used there, you know, higher caste, lower caste, ownership of the resources, dependent, right? The occupant and the claimant, inhuman and human. And the argument goes further. One needs to understand how this dynamic plays in a particular location. While working on these texts, I understood that if we don't take and if we concentrate only on the text on the page, we may actually miss some of the very significant aspects of the power dynamics related or rooted to those respective spaces, which can actually add layers and strength to our analysis. Now, ownership of resources and the spatial variation will change, its dynamics. As I said, precarity in an urban space will be different at different times, and the different precarities, we know about that. I'll just give example. If you have seen this film, Manthan, Nasruddin Shah, and it's all same battle again for the resources, how to own the resources, what to do with those resources, and milk and all. It will change, but these are the experiences rooted in those spaces. So when we talk about the texts in translation and locating those experiences, we also take into account those spaces where these experiences coming from. It has a lot to do with the genre, especially the plays that I read. Now, I put it this way: experience, construction of experience in language of performance, translation in another language, and then some of the texts are performed also. So performance in target language. This is how the text moves or the experience moves. What about the genre? I mean, does the genre give something to me in which the experience is written? Apart from the textual understanding, there are questions. So I just put these questions here. Why did women writers choose to write plays? And in fact, the decision of writing the plays delayed the translation because different texts are received and translated because of various reasons, different reasons. Autobiographies were read and appreciated, and so translated a little quickly. Now, history of performances of women's plays in the source language was very haphazard, even if there were women playwrights and they were writing plays and some of them were performing also. The history was quite haphazard. And that makes the translators also very anxious. And that's why the anthology I'm talking about was published in 2005. It's very recent activity when these plays started coming into translation. Now, without the ascertained appreciation, translations get delayed. Then the other issue is subversion of the form. As I said earlier, the question about why is this a play and all. The very purpose of the writer in choosing a play was to subvert that, I will not write a story, I will not write a novel, but I will write something which asks me to be, or which asks the subject to be performed in front of people. Second, I will not write in the form which is given to me. So the very subject is about the form. So the choice of the form also tells me a lot, which also badly affected the genre formation. And if the genre is formed, then you have actually research on it, the consistent research on it. Now, all that is haphazard for various reasons. Now, what these people do, these writers do is, they desist the given genre. And that's what the purpose is, to subvert, to challenge the form of the male-dominated theater, cathartic theater, or Aristotelian theater, which is rule-bound and all. So not following in that trap and giving an experiential turn to the performance also. I gave earlier the example of this play, Crossing the River. This is just a poem, a performer comes on the stage, she asks few questions. Who am I? Which Sita I am? She is Sita. She comes on the stage and she just asks few questions. And she says, I am created by somebody. I am not my own. And I would like to claim myself. So hereafter, I'll be my own. Because many people, many writers, epic and all, have written about me and they formed me. They formed an idea of Sita. But my idea of Sita is absent in all the form. So why should I follow those? Hereafter, I decide to conduct myself the way I want. Now, obviously, this will not come in a form, which is, the very subject is to challenge the stereotype of the conduct, of the appearance, of the being mythologically also. So obviously she just says, asks, raises few questions and leaves. Now, what does the form give to me in a translated text? In a text like that, there is also challenge of acceptance is involved. There's also a challenge to universe. Now, I'll tell you, like, I have seen the research scholars doing this when they see the play, as I gave an example of the member of the research registration committee saying, is this a play? So obviously he was going by the conventional form of the play. A play needs to be like this, should be divided properly, plot, character, and those kinds of requirements of a play to be called a play, kind of a thing. In a similar way, there is a challenge to universality also. Like, think about what is universal for men and what is universal from women's perspective. Will the same things that we often count universal in men's literature or male-dominated literature should be applicable to women's writing also? And then why should they write in the same way? Like, there is universality. So procrastination is a universal element. It may be his fault, and there might be some others who might be involved in that and who might have procrastination, but doesn't mean that it is an universal element. So you have to think about the tragic flaw, like a play which has a hero and a hero falls because of the tragic flaw. We know Brecht challenging that notion and saying it's not tragic flaw, but the action that makes the play, or the audience is supposed to watch the play, quote, like that, watch the play, go out and do the action. Action is not here, like, coming here, sitting and weeping after seeing a tragic scene and going out and sleep, all passions spent, like that. So there is this challenge to the universality also. So when we talk about the form, we don't just concentrate on what is written in the text, but we also go by or think about why this form is chosen and what the form, what kind of bearing the form has on the experiences, or how experience is modified by the form. This form also raises this question, and that we have to really look, situating the experience in literary drama history, one in the source language and in the target language. Translations increase the possibilities to compensate the absence from the literary history for a long time. Also creating a comparative discourse, a critical framework. When you start reading, you obviously develop, because there's no ready-made framework for that. So you have to invest a lot, possibility of increased reception and all. Now, while doing this research on the translated text, we can involve in these questions as well, and that could be a good service. And I am just giving one example. I'm talking about women's plays, but it can be done with all other texts as well. Performity in translation, as I am talking about the plays, what this performativity means in translation also. Drama, theater, and performance. I mean, we use these words loosely, right? Drama, theater, performance. But what are they basically? They are, I put it this way: textual, spatial, and experiential aspect of the same exercise. When we say drama, we immediately imagine a text. When we say theater, we have a space in mind. When we say performance, something, the text is being performed, giving an experiential dimension, right? An exercise. But they all are same. But then these are different aspects. Now, this relationship has to be remembered while working on the translation of the text. How they are written, how they are translated, whether the translator is aware of that bond, or whether the translator is aware of which of the quotients is higher, what is the intention of the writer and all. plays meant to perform the experience back to the bearers of the experience. These plays were actually meant, I mean, many of the plays were performed in front of those stakeholders. For example, this Kaat Ki Gadi was meant to be performed before the leprosy patients, their friends and relatives, so as to make them sensitive towards the patients and educate them about the disease. As well as it had the testimonies of the erstwhile leprosy patients to dispel the fears among the population. Now, the dramatic performance requires a specific performance of the audience also. So while reading this wooden cart, we have to understand this performative dimension of the play. I'll come to that in the next slide. Now, after it is written down, translated changes its performative dynamics from the original audience, for whom it was just a performance, Hindi-speaking audience. Performance, and the English-speaking audience, it was reading only. I mean, when somebody reads the translation thing. So these two activities were different. I mean, in fact, this play was written down very late. Earlier, it was not a play. It was, I mean, not a written play, not a written document. They were just set of instructions, some handmade, dialogues, which the performers brought with them, with their context, with their experiences, and they used to perform in different locations. So it was not a written play for a long time. Then after some time, it was written down in Hindi. So it's mainly the performance. Now the perceptible difference of the performative of experience will change. There were leprosy patients when originally it was being performed. Presence of the leprosy patient on the stage was a key aspect of performance to eradicate the fear about the disease and accept the people with the history of leprosy for the audiences. At the same time, it was meant to increase the confidence and energy among the erstwhile patients so that they can re-socialize, they can be accepted and embraced by the people. Now, while reading the translated text, one needs to remember this because some of these plays had a very strong performative requirement, as in this case of wooden cart. I mean, I'll give a simple example. The wooden cart, when in relation to wooden cart, like when you have a disease like leprosy, what is the right response? Will you hide or should you come out and get treated? The normal response would be hide, right? When you have a disease, we hide, we don't show to people. There are, I mean, we know, like, now what is happening in that. So the normal reaction is to hide, but that's not a right response in Brechtian terms. Right response would be you show, you discuss about it, you come out, go to the doctor, get treated, and you are, you get rid of the disease. That's basically the correct response. If you remember this novel, Sanskara, for example, what is the right response to plague? Is it to find answers to this in some vague book, with the help of some vague laws which do not have any bearing on life? Or the other Agrahara, which understands that it is plague, we need to go to the municipal doctor, bring the doctor, confine people, get them treated, and get cure of plague. What is the right response? Here, that's why the performativity of the leprosy in front of the audience is a requirement. Performativity, like, the body should perform, and there should be some performance over the body also, the treatment, the operations, or whatever. Now these aspects are very crucial when we read the text in translation. Also think about the archaeology of the performance of experience, how those experiences grow over a period of time before being documented in the text. I'll give you a few examples here. Like, the stage directions are to make one imagine the space performance dynamic and the power play. I'm quoting this stage direction from the play Thirst, Vinodini's play Thirst, Daham. It's about like village assembly under a tree in the center of the village. The highlights are mine. I highlighted for this purpose. Some people are sitting on the elevated platform built around the tree. Some Dalits are sitting on the ground and some are standing. Pedda Reddy comes, sits in the chair. One or two people greet him. Now, anybody who understands this village setup will understand this space performance dynamic and the power play involved. Like, this is a place at the center of the village. So often we attribute center and its qualities. Some people who are influential people sitting on the elevated platform. Now we know that it is not an elevated platform just. It is the like judgment seat, right? It is justice. It is so many things. It's not just elevated platform, right? Elevated platform can be an accidental elevated platform also, right? In villages we see टेकड्या उंच उबड खाबड अशी जागा राहतात ना, ठीक आहे. So anything is, it's not an elevated platform like that. Some Dalits are sitting on the ground, some are standing. They are already there and they are seated on the ground. When this guy comes, he comes late and then sits in the chair. Now it automatically tells us, so it's not only simply a stage direction. We have to understand the power dynamic or the power play of the place also. And this is how, like, when we think about performing the play, even in English, how that space of the, play should be, or how the performance should take place, which should actually give correct sense of this power play. It's not just performing like this, but it should also reflect the power play. Now, how adaptation
Hello, comment, sir. You are not audible. Hello. Hello, comment, sir.
I think he's lost his connectivity, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Just a minute. Hello, sir. No, sir. Connectivity. अच्छा. हो का? लॅपटॉप चं का? बरं. मग उद्या नारायण सरांना करायचं का तुम्ही? Technical issues on this side.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was very insightful, informative, and useful session. Because of some technical problems, we are not able to connect him again. But then also, thank you for your stupendous explanation and examples, experiences you shared with us. It was very good, very excellent. It was excellent. Thank you very much, sir. Now we'll move towards the second session. And for this, again, I request all the participants that if they have got any questions, please put your questions in the chat box. Now, I would like to request our today's guest of honor, Honorable Dr. Narayan Prachand Sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh, to enlighten us with his words of wisdom. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Welcome,
And
sir.
A very good afternoon from the land of downlit mountains that is called Arunachal Pradesh. To the dignitaries, keynote speaker, Dr. Milind Pandit, the resource person, Dr. Rahul Kamble, organizing team, and of course, the audience, who are obviously the heart of this program. I would request to the organizers, since it has been consistently raining here, because of the network connectivity, I won't be able to share my screen, as well as I seek permission to keep my video off mode for a better clarity of voice.
Sure, sir. Will do, sir.
Thank you. It's always a challenge to be the last speaker. Why it's a challenge? Because often it happens that the earlier speakers cover most of the portion of your talk, or sometimes they are so good that the person begins to think, will I be able to attain to the qualities of the earlier speakers? And so forth. In short, it's a challenge. Or sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. You can learn a lot by listening to the people with the experience and frame your ideas. Now, if you ask me, in what way I'm taking my earlier speakers, my answer is blessings in disguise. It is so because for last 1.5 hours and more than that, both Dr. Milind Pandit and Dr. Rahul Kamble, with their expertise in the field of translation studies, have set a very solid platform for me. Therefore, it will be easy to share my ideas with you. Let me share a preview of my talk for these 30 minutes. Maybe the organizers have given me 40 minutes. I would like to stick to the time and may even complete before that. The preview is, my lecture will be including, these are the aspects: translation from the perspective of the translator, the reader, and the author. Since you have heard...
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Excuse me,
yes,
sir. Sorry to disturb you. So will you please share your screen?
I'm sorry, because of the network, I won't be able to share my screen.
Okay, you are just
I
going to
took
be
your
audible.
permission initially itself.
Okay, okay. Very sorry,
Okay.
sir. Very sorry to disturb you. Yes.
It's fine. Okay. So this talk will be having having these different perspectives on translation, from the perspective of the translator, from the perspective of the reader, and the author. As I was referring to earlier, two speakers, those who have laid a solid platform for me by talking about all the theoretical aspects of translation in detail. And the second aspect of my discussion will be translation and its significance. Third, the role of translation in changing the face of literary world. And fifth, the possibilities and challenges. Which one is more significant? And generally, which we give more importance to. And the last aspect will be, I will be highlighting or giving you a list of some of the most acknowledged authors in the world. And we know them because of only the translation. For this discussion, as other speakers have taken different literary texts for their discussion. For my discussion, I have selected some 3 videos of these 3 different personalities. One is a translator, other is a reader, and the third one is the poet as well as the translator. So I have taken their videos, I have heard to their experiences and framed my discussion here. The first one is the translator. Her name is Rose Chevaz. She is a French translator who describes the translation process as a finding voice. She calls it the translation as a finding voice. She says, when she begins translating the actual text, there is always a tension between meaning and music. So at the end of the scale, you have got the text where meaning is absolutely or quite essentially the main priority. When it comes to the legal text or the medical text, in the context of nobody is going to talk about the music and the poetry. Why? Because there, the absolute necessity is the information. But at the end of the other scale, you have poetry when obviously music is the key. There is no point in translating poetry just for the meaning of the words. The other texts, like prose, are somewhere in the middle, that they are always juggling in between music and the meaning. The translator says, when she prepares her first draft, she is more concerned about meaning and she wants to get every nuance of what the author has written. And once the draft is ready, she starts reading through, which is quite plotting from the point of view of the sound and the music. The Little Princess that she has translated this text by Anthony de Saint, which she translated, and according to her, it is one of the extreme examples which is deceptively simple. She says it is a deceptively simple. The language of the text is very simple, straightforward. The French was exquisite, she says, but when she began translating, she was horrified because during the process, she found English is much more plodding and prosaic. So all the work on that was playing with language, gathering the right rhythm, gathering the right musicality, playing with assonance, alliteration, and trying to create that likeness in English. And at the same time, she had to move a little bit away from the meaning. Therefore, she says, the translator always has to make the decision about what's going to take precedence, either its meaning or the music. Ideally, they came together, but sometimes, especially the source text has fun, wordplay, something has to get carried in order to keep that harmonious voice and the music. I got another perspective by a reader. So far, what we have heard and trying to understand the translation from the perspective of the translator. Now there is a reader. The reader is an 18-year-old Russian girl. Her name is Mariam Manshuran. Mariam is a voracious reader and reads in more than one languages, and according to her, translation is like measurement. As the translator was telling, okay, her own perspective and experience of in process of translating the text. Now the reader is telling her experiences of the translated works that she reads. And she says, translation is like a measurement. What is that measurement? When something is measured, was assumed that it's 100% correct. But even if we use any tools, she says, we still miss at least 0.0005 centimeters or even sometimes more. Likewise, when it comes to translating a text from one language to another, the truth is, as Willow Wilson says in Vikram the Vampire, she quotes him, languages are different for a reason. You can't move ideas between them without losing something. So translation is all about this. However, you try to be 100% correct or nearer to the source text, there is always something missing, or there is always something an addition to it. So here, I specifically would like to cite one of the incidents, she says, between the leading Dalit poet Namdev Desal and Vijay Tendulkar. So this was the incident to talk about how the reader and the author, the gap between these two. For example, like I was reading Namdev Desal's this collection of poetry, Golpita, and Vijay Tendulkar has written an introduction to that. Here, for the first time, Namdev Desal has invited or called Vijay Tendulkar to write an introduction to his collection. He has given a copy to him. Vijay Tendulkar was reading it for some days, and he absolutely failed to understand the poetry. And of course, to write an introduction to the collection, he has to understand the poetry first. And he gives a call or writes a letter to him and says that I'm sorry, I failed to understand the poetry. Though it is written in his mother tongue, like Vijay Tendulkar is a Marathi and he speaks Marathi, it's his language, and the poetry is also written in Marathi, still he fails to understand. Then Namdev Desal invites him to Mumbai, and he takes him to the places about which this poetry is written. He introduced to the people about whom the poem are all about. So finally, by staying some days there, Vijay Tendulkar could able to understand or begin to understand the poems. And he comes back, read the draft again, and he writes an introduction to it. What I mean here is the gap between the source language and the reader or the translation. So to understand the source text, one has to have the complete understanding of the text, of the theme, the language, the person, the characters. So most often there are these gaps you find which are a challenge in translating the source text to the other languages. So here, Mariam talks about her experiences of reading J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, which is, I took this because this is one of the most acknowledged and famous texts. And obviously the the participants here attending are well known about these texts. So Mariam talks about the Harry Potter and she says, according to her, it is very close to the original text. She reads this Harry Potter in Armenian, one of the languages that she understands and reads in. So I quote her, the difference is so minor that it does not matter. What she says? The Harry Potter in Armenian, when she reads, she finds a difference is very minor between the source text and the translated text. So it doesn't matter. And she also says an entirely opposite experience of reading a translated text of Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And she compares this text with another text that she read in Russian, a translated work, that is Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird. And she says, when she was reading this book, she could not understand the gender of the main character until about 60 pages, because the author was only giving clues and playing with the language by confusing the readers with, like, I quote, I swear, Scout, you act so much like a girl. It's mortifying. Actually, the main character is a girl. But if you read this quote, you get an idea that she may not be a girl or maybe someone else. But later, she understands it was an essential part of the theme, because the main character reveals her gender in course of the novel, so does the reader. But if you get into the source text that this Harper Lee has written, he has this English has this possibility of hiding the identity of the main character until 60 pages. Why? Because the theme of the text is revealing the gender, and slowly, steadily, as the main character reveals her gender, so does the readers. But when it comes to the Russian translation of these To Kill the Mockingbird, it lacks the uniqueness that English has and the opportunity that it could give the author to convey his theme through the language and character, revealing its identity together. So, thus the reader concludes here, her experience of reading the translated and the source text with a question, is it the same book we read in translation, or it is something more or something less than it is? So in Russian, the translator has disclosed the identity of the main character on the first page itself. It's because of the limitations of certain languages. So you find that limitation. English has that possibility to talk about 60 pages without revealing the identity. But when it comes to Russian, the translator has to reveal her identity on the page 1 itself. So these are certain possibilities and challenges you find when the translators or the readers, they read the translated work. The third person I choose to take from for the purpose is a young Indonesian poet who is also the translator. Her name is Natasha Sandak. Her experiences reveal some other aspects of the translation. Natasha says, all humans speak the same language. Maybe all human beings can't talk and understand one language, but the entire human community can understand and convey the universal language of joy, sadness, and pain. Though the languages are different, expressions are different, sounds are different, but the emotions that expressed in those languages are similar, are universal. So she says, all humans speak the same language. Maybe all human beings can't talk and understand one language, but the entire human community can understand and convey the universal language of joy, sadness, and pain. The poet shares an incident in her life, which made her to think and translate the Indonesian literature in English. She narrates, once she had have an opportunity to visit Columbia University, and she happens to meet an American boy. When she introduces herself as Indonesian, a very strange reply she gets from the American. Like, is there a country called Indonesia? She says, it was humiliating that someone even does not know that your motherland exists. Yet, the incident made her realize that Indonesia is not well known in the world, and since she is a poet, she finds one of the reasons behind this is that Indonesian literature does not have prominent place at the global platform because the country does not have enough translators. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Natasha, she turns to be the translator because of the incident in her life. And she decides to take the literature, Indonesian literature written in the regional languages at the global level, translating those texts in other languages, like the English, which is at present one of the most prominent languages spoken around the world. So this does not apply to Indonesian literature only. What the humiliation that Natasha felt when she was being said that is there a country exists, and now she relates that to the literature of the country, and she says this does not apply only to Indonesian literature only. This may also apply to the literature of other countries and the literature written in other regional languages. Natasha, by referring to J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, says, successful stories are always heard. Therefore, Harry Potter collection has been translated into more than 68 different languages in the world. Why each and every one of us here on the platform know about Harry Potter? It's because of the translations, because of the name and the fame it got. It is published in different languages in the world. Approximately, the data says more than 68 languages. Therefore, the poet says, translating literature opens the door to the international audience or to the readers. And then she explains by being herself a translator. The task of the translator, based on her own experiences, she says, the translator is not someone like the robot. And she comes to the point what a translator is. Is he a robot who just only concerns about the word-to-word translation? But he or she is a human being with an emotion, experiences, ego, cultural upbringing, etc. So when he or she reads the source text, obviously gets affected by language, emotions, character, culture, events that occur in the lives of the characters, and also understands in his or her perspective or based on the his and hers experiences as a human being. Therefore, the reading a text, a literary text, does not mean that reading the scattered words on the pages. The translator reads the words that are associated with emotions. He reads words the author wrote sometimes with a spontaneous overflow of that powerful feelings, and sometimes with lots of efforts by taking the readers on journey with the words, emotions, and the characters. While reading the literature, we just do not read the description of the particular event or the character, but the journey of the character, and the translator as a reader undergoes the journey in the lives of the character. To substantiate her statement, Natasha quotes Viktor Shklovsky, a Russian formalist, who says, "Art is thinking in images. The purpose of imagery is to bring the significance of the image closer to our understanding. Without this, the image has no meaning." There is where the translator and the poet makes this aspect of translating very clear, that every translator understands and conveys the emotions and the story differently. So if you give the same source text to two different translators, the final product of both the translators will be different, because they perceive and comprehend the text differently, or experiences shape the ways one perceives the art. Therefore, even though the translated works are based on the source text, yet stand alone as the original text. Therefore, the translation for ages has played a very significant role in the world of literature and culture. We can refer to all the classics in the world which have shaped the literary background, are most often read in translations, and have become touchstones for the literature written across the globe. Since the time constraint, I would not be entering into the discussion of the literature which have shaped the world literature, but before concluding this discussion, let me share a very astonishing fact. That is, so far, 114 Nobel Prizes are awarded, and out of that, only 28 Nobel Prizes are owned by the writers, those who write in English, and the rest are being conferred on the literature written in other languages. When I went into the fact of the process of selecting the winner of a literary prize, for my surprise, I found most often the committee of the selection committee relies on one of the most significant aspects of the selections is the source of the text and the author, the success of the text and the author across the globe, which means not only in the source language of the text it has been written in, but also the languages that it has been translated into. So this is how the translation has, its significance. Let me give you the list of some of the most significant authors which you and me are known because of their translated works. I hope you know that Orhan Pamuk. Orhan Pamuk is the author of the Istanbul, who has won a literary prize, Nobel Literary Prize. And we know the only Indian who won the Literary Nobel Prize, that is Rabindranath Tagore, and that is also for the translated work, that is Gitanjali. Originally, it is written in Bengali, and he has translated that in English, which has become the source of information for the committee. So thus, translation plays a very significant role to shape the face of the literary world. So I hope with these different experiences from the different perspective of a translator or a reader and a poet and the translator, I have made my point and have given you some platform to think on the to think on this aspect which is been here assigned for this discussion: translations in practice, challenges and possibilities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. It was very valuable, informative, and insightful session. It was a wonderful gift of knowledge. So thank you once again. Now participants are requested to fill their feedback form. Feedback link will be provided on the Telegram group and it will be active till 10 p.m. today. Now, I would like to request Manjusha Mure ma'am, Department of English, Sri Venkatesh College, Devagaraja, to express words of gratitude.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. A very good afternoon to one and all. On behalf of Sri Venkatesh College, Devagaraja, IQAC and Department of English, myself Manjusha Mule take this privilege to propose vote of thanks for the distinguished speakers and the delegates who have joined the one-day national webinar on the topic Translation in Practice, Challenges and Possibilities, organized by Department of English in collaboration with IQAC. First of all, on behalf of our college, I express my sincere thanks to the keynote speaker, Honorable Dr. Milind Pandit Sir, Associate Professor, Department of English, Matchadari College, Ambad, Maharashtra, for his informative and valuable talk on the theme on the topic. Thank you, sir. I thank heartily to the resource person of the first plenary session, Honorable Dr. Rahul Kamble Sir, Associate Professor, English and Foreign Language, University, Hyderabad, for his inciting and enlightening speech. I express my deep sense of gratitude towards the resource person of the second plenary session, Honorable Dr. Narayan Prachand Sir, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Rajiv Gandhi University, Itanagar, Arunachal Pradesh, for his remarkable speech. I thank Honorable Principal of our college, Dr. Gajanan Jadhav Sir, for giving us the permission to organize the webinar on this topic. I thank the participants who have joined the webinar from various parts of the country. I express my special thanks to Dr. Sudhir Chauhan Sir for organizing the webinar on such a topic. I thank Dr. Bhalerao Sir and Dr. Dhokle also. I also thank Professor Pawan Kadam and his team for taking a lot of efforts for the technical support of this webinar. With the due permission of the organizers, I hereby declare that this webinar is over. Thanks to all once again. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. Pandit sir. Thank you, Dr. Kamble sir. Thank you, Dr. Prachanda Narayan sir, for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Once again, I would like to thank all the participants, delegates for joining us and making this webinar a successful one. Thank you. Thank you very much.